So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this special LSBU Refugee Week 2022 event. We are absolutely delighted to be joined by Kate Higgins, Chief Operating Officer for RefuAid. Hi, Kate.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thanks
for being here. And also joined by my colleague, Safia Barriksai. Safia, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Safia Barriksai. I'm an associate professor in the School of Engineering, and I'm also a former refugee from Afghanistan. So I came to the UK as a teenager, and I've been working at LSBU for a while, and really delighted that we have RefuAid with us during Refugee Week, and especially Kate. This event is very special to me because when we came to the UK, the refugees who come, generally speaking, the access to education can be quite problematic. And it's really important that we support organizations like RefuAid as a university so that we could build partnerships and work with them such that refugees have equal opportunities and equal access to education. So I'm really delighted to have Kate with us. And thank you, Neil, for making it all happen. My awesome colleague, Neil, who has been working tirelessly in the background, trying to make this collaboration with RefuAid a success. So thank you so much, Neil, for making it happen. And I'm going to hand over back to Neil.
Cool. We're delighted to welcome RefuAid back. Kate, thanks so much for being here in light of last year. And we're going to talk shortly about the work that we've done with RefuAid, but we're not going to talk too much on that because we want to hear from Kate. Just to take you through a little bit of virtual housekeeping, starting with a short statement on respect and dignity. So everyone attending an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity and courtesy. We value contributions, feedback and comments, and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating and bringing communities together. LSBU does not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any such behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. I'm sure that's not going to be a problem today. We want our events to be an enjoyable, safe and warm experience for all. So thank you for adhering to those guidelines. Just to take you through the Zoom functionality, we're on Zoom Pro, which means you can turn your cameras and mics on to engage. I would love to encourage you to do so during the Q&A later if you have any questions for Kate. The chat box is open. Feel free to use the chat box. It's great to see you using it to introduce yourselves in there. Please continue to do so. Let us know who you are, what you do and where you're joining us from and what you want to get out of today. Far from detracting from the event, it helps to bring the event to life and really kind of encourage that spirit of community and togetherness, which is something we need when we consider the well-being and support of refugees. So thank you for that. You'll see that I have enabled subtitles, which are the subtitles that you see appearing on your screen right now. If you don't wish to see them, you can hide them by clicking the little up arrow next to CC Live Transcript and clicking Hide Transcript. That's all from me. Please share your thoughts on Twitter. Forgot to say that. It helps us to bring the conversation to an audience beyond itself, and I'll pop some Twitter handles and our hashtag in there shortly. That's all from me. Kate, I'm going to hand over to you and I'm going to spotlight you, but I'll be back shortly for Q&A.
Thank you very much. Well, it is a pleasure to be part of this event and thank you all for attending. I think in the first instance, I'll just kind of run through exactly what we do, how we came about, and then if anybody's got any questions at all, please feel free to ask them. But primarily, RefuAid's aim is to provide people who have fled their home countries with tailored and specific support that will help them to rebuild independent and dignified lives in the UK. Our focus is mostly to ensure that people are able to achieve their educational and professional aspirations, whether that be returning to their prior professional field that they had in their home country or whether it is going back to university. Those are our main areas of support. This focus actually came about a little bit by chance. So in 2015, our co-founders, Tamsin and Anna, had actually never met before. Both of them had been following the events unfolding in Calais and the Mediterranean with horror, as I'm sure most people were at the time. And it was actually the death of the little boy, Aylan Kurdi, who I'm sure that most of you will remember is the little boy whose body washed up on a beach in Turkey. That was very much a pivotal moment for both Anna and Tamsin. Tamsin reached out on a local refugees welcome Facebook page, just looking to connect with anyone in the local area who was keen to support in the way that she was. And actually Anna, our other co-founder, and a surgeon called Luke responded at the time. And the three of them met up together. They went for a coffee and just discussed, what they could do together. 2 weeks later, after that, they'd organised a voluntary medical team of doctors and nurses, and they'd sourced a bunch of medication to go out to the Greek island of Lesbos, where many people were arriving on a daily basis and being put into the refugee camps on the island. And I mean, it is safe to say that what they experienced in Lesbos was nothing short of horrendous. Sanitation was poor, if not completely non-existent. And the lack of medical care was resulting in completely needless deaths from some of the most basic and treatable illnesses. People were being forced into dependency and were given absolutely no autonomy or independence, and were unable to kind of, plan how to move on from those camps. And it was all simply because they'd been forced to flee their homes and seek routes to safety. But unfortunately, safety is absolutely not what they were being given in those camps. When Anna and Tamsin returned home, they discovered that some of the people that they'd met in Lesbos were actually arriving in the UK and claiming asylum here, which was amazing. And I think kind of naively, we all assumed, that the UK is a safe country, everything will be fine. There's a lot of, support and infrastructure, and people will be able to kind of go on to what they wanted to do. But that was just not the case. And in particular, there were two university students, one dentist and one neurosurgeon that Anna and Tamsin had met. When they were asked what it was that they needed in order to, rebuild their lives, the answer was resoundingly to learn English, to help them to integrate, but to also return to their education and or their profession, because that was so much part of their identity, and it is one of the only things that you can kind of take with you as you cross borders. And also those elements also allow them to contribute to society and to provide for themselves and their families. It was at this point that we kind of realised that the English language provision in the UK is very limited for refugees and asylum seekers. Government provided courses, which are known as ESOL, are relatively scarce and quite hard to access, and they don't necessarily provide the level or the qualification that people need. So, for example, and I'm sure many of you already know this, but most international students will have to sit the IELTS language exam in order to accept their university degrees. And that's also the same with a lot of professional bodies, such as the General Medical Council or the General Dental Council. You have to sit either the IELTS or an equivalent exam in order to prove your proficiency. And you have to achieve a certain level. And ESOL, unfortunately, doesn't quite get you to that level. So Anna and Tamsin kind of took matters into their own hands, and they approached a local English language school, which is called Wimbledon School of English. They met with senior managers there, and they just asked if there was anything that could be done whatsoever. And thankfully, Wimbledon School of English were absolutely phenomenal. They offered all of the students, so those 4 students, the doctor, the dentist, and the 2 students, they offered them free tuition in their classes, in exam classes, allowing them to study for as long as they needed until they were ready to sit the exam, until they thought that they were ready to, get the grade that they needed. The agreement there was that RefuAid would support with kind of the financials, so we would support with travel expenses, we would cover the cost of the exam and any course materials needed, and then the school would provide the tuition completely free. RefuAid would also be responsible for supporting students with kind of casework and welfare. So whether they had any issues with their immigration case or, housing or needing to set up a bank account, etc., RefuAid would be on hand to deal with that. Since then, I mean, that was a huge success. And since then, we've now extended the programme to over 90 schools across the country. It's schools and universities who offer the language programme. And we've had almost 700 students graduate the programme with the qualification that they need to either go on to university or to re-access employment, which is amazing. And about 50% of the students on our language programme are university students. So once they've got that qualification, they will go on to university and they will kind of, fit into the university institution as with other students. And the other 50% tend to be professionals who need the qualification in order to go back to work. So for many professionals, Another barrier that they will then face once they've got that language qualification is finance. So for many professionals, whether it is a doctor or a lawyer or a lorry driver or a beautician, there are specific reaccreditation pathways that people will have to go through. And those do come at a significant cost, which includes, exams, preparation courses, living expenses, registration fees, etc. And for newly arrived refugees who have very limited access to credit, that becomes incredibly difficult to fund. So most people who have arrived, and claimed asylum, they will be unable to access mainstream finance because they won't necessarily have a fixed address in the UK for 3 years, and they won't have a UK credit history, so we won't be able to run credit checks on them. So that makes them ineligible for high street loans from banks. So this is why we often end up seeing, lawyers working as taxi drivers, or engineers working in fast food restaurants, or nurses working as cleaners, because they just end up in survival jobs trying to get the money to pay for their reaccreditation. So in response to that, RefuAid set up the first and only UK-wide loan scheme for refugees. So we offer interest-free loans of up to £10,000, and that's for refugees who need financial support to cover the cost of their professional requalification. All repayments are worked out on an individual basis, so it's not a one-size-fits-all program at all, and it's to make sure that they are manageable. And from that kind of one-to-one casework and one-to-one support, we have maintained a 98.9% repayment rate. It was prior to COVID 100%, but obviously with the cancellation of exams and the stagnation of recruitment and redundancies, that did drop slightly, but I think we're still very proud of the 98.9%. So that kind of helps people to reaccredit their qualifications to ensure that they are ready to practice in the UK. And we very much thought that when people got to that stage, that they would be good to go and they would walk straight into jobs. Unfortunately, we kind of realized that wasn't always the case, and that people would often get overlooked throughout the recruitment process because they may have had a gap in their CV, or a lack of UK work experience or any UK references. So in response to that, we then set up an employment program, which we actually set up on the very first day of the very first lockdown, which you would have thought would be terrible timing, but actually we work with a lot of healthcare professionals, so it worked out very well. And the purpose of the program is to match qualified RefuAid clients with employment opportunities that are commensurate with their skills and experiences and their qualifications, both from home and in the UK. We work very closely with employers to make sure that they understand the barriers our clients face, but also to kind of help mitigate them, and to understand that there is a huge pool of talent amongst refugee communities, and how they can access that and how they can do so mindfully. We also provide pre-employment support to all of our candidates to make sure that they are work ready, whether that is support with CV writing, interview preparation, mentoring with professional networks. So that is a big success so far. As you can imagine, we are experiencing more demand for our programs than ever before. So in August 2021, there was the mass evacuations of Afghanistan, and then obviously earlier this year with the invasion of Ukraine, more people are arriving in the UK than ever before, and more people are in need of support to rebuild their lives than ever before. In response to the invasion of Ukraine specifically, Anna and I actually went out to Warsaw in March earlier this year to kind of work with local organisations to understand, what the needs of people were when they were arriving from Ukraine to Poland, and to facilitate safe routes to the UK if and when possible. When we first went, we kind of were initially going to start talking to people about employment, and we thought people would, just kind of laugh us out the room and say, I've just fled my home country. I don't want to be talking to you about employment opportunities. I don't want to be talking to you about coming to the UK. But actually it was the complete opposite. And we found that pretty much everyone we spoke to was just like, how can I go back to my job? How can I provide for my family, etc. Whilst we were out there, we were pretty shocked to notice that there was very little large NGO presence. Despite thousands of people turning up to Warsaw Central Station every hour, there was no big NGOs, there was no UK presence at all. And actually, whilst we were there, it was at this point that the Homes for Ukraine scheme was announced by the British government. As I'm sure most of you are aware, this is a scheme that allows people, families and individuals in the UK to sponsor those fleeing Ukraine by offering accommodation, whether it is a spare room or a spare home. And it's been amazing. It's amazing to see how quickly a scheme like that can be mobilised. But I think we've personally found it incredibly disheartening to kind of see the discrepancy in the response to refugees based on where they're coming from. But nonetheless, we are very keen to make sure that this scheme works, and to prove that it can be effective, so that we can demonstrate that this can be replicated for anyone, no matter where they're coming from, or whether they're fleeing war or persecution or climate change. If we can replicate this, then that would be a huge win for anyone and everyone. So as such, we're actually now supporting with the Homes for Ukraine scheme. We are working on visa applications and travel support for anyone who is looking to come to the UK and applies to RefuAid. So we work with an organisation called Refugees at Home, who are incredible. They support with hosting accommodation, and they help us find the sponsors for the people who apply to us. And we have 2 wonderful Ukrainian ladies who are running the programme, and also a Polish lady called Ella, and they are phenomenal, and they are supporting people to find the sponsors and to apply for the visas. And then once they are either en route to the UK or in the UK, they can then be referred to our previous programmes. In addition to that, in response to the invasion of Ukraine, we've also had a huge outpouring of support from businesses across the country, who have all been appalled by the situation in Ukraine and are just absolutely desperate to do something to help. So we've been working with a number of large employers such as PwC, OVO Energy, Mulberry, and many more, who have all pledged to support RefuAid clients with the language and employment support that they need in order to get them through to that stage where they are ready to go into a job. And what has been amazing from that response is, although it was kind of prompted by the invasion of Ukraine and those fleeing Ukraine, everyone that we've spoken to has said that the support they're offering extends to anyone who has fled their home country, regardless of where they are from or how they got to the UK. So that is amazing and very encouraging, and just goes to show what can be done kind of collectively. So yeah, that's kind of where we're up to now. It's exciting and fast paced, and as you can imagine, it is very testing in the current political and the current political climate makes it a bit challenging, but we're still going.
Thank you so much, Kate. Just give me a second to come back on the screen. Brilliant. Thank you for a really kind of cohesive overview of everything you do up to today. It's really kind of like so impressive to hear, and thank you for giving us the history of how it all started as well. I know we were speaking just a little bit before, but that storytelling is so important in understanding kind of people's motives. And I know that from just looking at the chat box, there's a lot of reasons as to why people are joining today and where their interest lies. And I'd really like to hear from our audience actually. So if you have got a question for Kate and you'd like to discuss anything, please do pop your cameras and microphones on and ask. No need to pop your hands up, simply pop your camera on and let me know that you'd like to ask a question. Safia, I'd like to invite you to join us back as well. Hi there, Rula, we'll come over to you in a second. So this is an interactive session. We want to hear your thoughts and questions. Kate, I'm just going to start off with one of those questions, actually, if that's okay, talking about storytelling and understanding why people are so passionate about this. What's your story?
My story in terms of how I kind of got involved with RefuAid is kind of a right place, right time one, because I actually was working at Wimbledon School of English at the time that Anna and Tamsin came in. So that's how I very first found out about RefuAid. And I just thought it was an organisation that puts people at the very core of what they do. So it's never led by us, it's always led by our clients. And I think that really amazed me at the time. And so I just followed RefuAid from the outset, and I think I followed them for maybe about a year or 2 years, and I saw them grow from that very first moment of approaching the school and getting that support to growing that to a much bigger program and a much more holistic and comprehensive organisation. And I just thought that was absolutely phenomenal. And then I got in touch with Anna and Tamsin, And it all kind of just came from there, which is nice, and that it happened very organically.
Is it something that you ever expected to see yourself in, like in terms of kind of like a career?
Yeah, so yes and no. I kind of always knew, so I did social anthropology at university, and I always knew that I wanted to do something very much based on humans and, you know, supporting people where they needed it most. What I personally really struggled with trying to kind of tap into the charity sector was finding an organization that did put people first and didn't kind of do the one size fits all, we know what's best for everyone has to do this. I really had a bit of a, you know, a moral issue with going into that. So then it was just, yeah, perfect timing that I found an organization that kind of looked at what people needed and got them to kind of tell us rather than the other way around.
And Ruda, I will come to you for a second, but actually one of the points I noted was actually about that co-production. You know, I know that's a kind of like a bit of a kind of like new term that's going around in terms of that, but how important is that? And you said about, you know, working with the 2 Ukrainian women on the homes to refugees scheme. How important is that co-production?
It's vital in everything that we do, because as much as we can, obviously we've learned a lot over the last few years, and we can advise our clients on everything that we've learned, but we haven't been through half of what they've been through. We haven't experienced what they've experienced. We don't have a full understanding of the barriers in the same way that they do. So, you know, it's them that they have to teach us in order to, you know, help overcome those barriers. And I think that's just the most important aspect of all that we do. And we've recently set up, and as part of that, we've recently set up a mentor network, because for those people who are going through the requalification process, so for example, the doctors, the lawyers, the accountants, we can tell them, you know, from our experience of other clients, what the process that they have to go through, but we can't really, you know, advise on what that experience is actually like, and the strains that it puts on you, and how to navigate that. So we've set up a mentor program where candidates who have gone through our programs and got to the end of it can then come back and mentor people and kind of talk them through the process with a level of understanding that we will just never have.
And so it's all part of that lived experience.
Exactly.
Which we need to listen to. Rula, I'll come over to you.
Oh, hi, thank you so much for this event. It's absolutely wonderful to hear about what you're doing. I mean, as I mentioned in the chat, I work for the charity and I manage the employment pathway project. So we have lots of referrals between us, but I haven't met you like personally. I know my colleagues, they did.
Yeah.
So I have a questions for you. I mean, I'm sure you have came across qualification like nursing. I mean, in our community, we have many of our moms who used to work as a nurse, and I know how much this country is crying for nurses. And I know that there is like different ways. So I wonder if you have done any piece of work on qualification to become a nurse in the UK. I know there is, I know there is many ways, and it's not all of them are difficult and tricky, but we haven't got any chance or the capacity to set up things for nursing. So I wonder if you have something on this. And another thing, I know that you might have mentioned that, but I might miss it, I'm sorry. But in terms of the referral, are you taking any referrals at the moment? And do you support only refugees or asylum seekers as well as refugees?
Yeah, I'll go for that second point first. So yes, we are accepting referrals. What I would just say is that obviously we are inundated with applications at the moment. For our language program, we are prioritizing based on any students who have already got an undergraduate offer. So they just need to sit the IELTS exam in order to accept that offer, and professionals who need the qualification in order to go back to work. Obviously, once if we ever manage to get through the backlog of applications, then we can open that up. But at the moment, based on the fact that we have so many people on the waiting list, that's how we're having to prioritize. Yeah. We support anyone from a displaced background. So whether they've got, you know, humanitarian protection, family reunification, refugee status, still waiting on their asylum claim, we will put, they are eligible for our language program. Unfortunately, asylum seekers aren't eligible for the loan program, and that is just because of financial regulations, unfortunately. for any asylum seekers who go onto the language program, if they have a university offer, we will support them to apply for scholarships as well, because as an asylum seeker, unfortunately, you're not eligible for student finance. So in order to take up your university offer, you will need a scholarship or some sort of financial support. So that's on referrals. And with nurses, yes, I completely agree. Nursing requalification can be very, very complicated and difficult to navigate. We've actually set up a program specifically for nurses in collaboration with the NHS and Health Education England. And the way that works is we work on the language with the clients. So they will go through a course to prepare them for the OET exam, and we will help them with the OET fees. And then they will also go on to a course at Liverpool John Moores University. It's a 3-week kind of crash course, if you will, in clinical skills. So it's not teaching them clinical skills from the very beginning, because obviously as a qualified nurse in their home country, they already know it. It's just a bit of a refresher session for 3 weeks. And whilst they're doing that 3-week refresher session, NHS staff will be there and will be kind of assessing them to kind of understand what level they would be eligible to go into. So whether it's a healthcare assistant or a nursing associate or a qualified nurse, and then they will get offered jobs based on that. Whilst they're in those jobs, so for example, if a nurse is, she's not ready to sit, or he's not ready to sit his OSCE exams, which are the requalification exams, then they can go in as a healthcare associate or a healthcare assistant, and they can then work their way up whilst doing their requalification exams, which will mean that they are getting an income and getting that kind of, clinical skills practice whilst they are working towards their requalification exams. And then they're already in the NHS, so that once they do get the qualification and they do get registered with the NMC, then they can go straight into a fully registered role.
Wow, this is impressive. I know that in terms of the NHS nursing program, I know that you have a waiting list in terms of the referrals, but do you have a separate way for referral for this specific program, or it's the same way? It's on waiting.
So people would have to apply via our website as they normally would for our programs, but as a nurse, they would kind of be filtered into a kind of separate pool of people, because obviously that's quite a comprehensive program. So they wouldn't necessarily, they might get put onto our language course if they weren't either eligible or available for the nurses program. But yeah, they would apply the same way. Okay.
So you're not taking referrals for this program separately. It's on the same way. It's on the website. Yeah. Okay. And I'm sure I'm really sorry. I need to give another chance for other people, but it's so interesting what you're talking about. And I'm sure that you might have came across such cases when asylum seekers have the right to work.
Yeah.
And we have been facing this, and it has been incredibly difficult to know the rules and how they are allowed to work. And we know when they are getting support from the Home Office, when they start to earn money, this support will stop. So have you got any experience on that?
Yeah, so with permission to work can be granted for an asylum seeker if they have been waiting for 12 months or more on their asylum claim and they haven't heard anything back from the Home Office. The permission to work will be granted according to the shortage occupation list, so it only covers specific, employment. So for healthcare professionals in particular, that can obviously be great, because it means that they can help the NHS at a time that is really, really needed. But it does obviously come with those complications in that, if an asylum claim then gets rejected 6 months down the line and they're in employment, that has implications for their employment and their employer. And equally, if they do start earning an income, then all of their Home Office support is withdrawn. So it can be a bit of a catch-22 for people, because they don't really know where they stand. What has been quite impressive from the Home Office is that we have had on multiple occasions for healthcare workers, people have been able to get permission to work prior to the 12-month mark. It is only for healthcare professionals, and it is because of the COVID indemnity bill and being able to work in the NHS at a time when it is most needed. So that has been amazing and shows that there is discretion that can be used. But yeah, it is a very complicated situation with the permission to work.
Thank you so much, Ruda. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great that you could join us. Thanks for your questions. And we've got a question from Georgina. You mentioned that mentoring is available. Is it possible to refer our students to the mentoring specifically if they're from a refugee background, or would they need to have been a part of one of your programs?
No, I think it's very much in the early stages, so we would be happy to accept referrals. If it is for students who are kind of, going through their first undergraduate degree, then there is a potential that we could match them with other students who have gone to university for the first time, who have gone through our programs. I think in that situation, I would just suggest doing it case by case, because obviously if you do feel like people would benefit from a mentor, then we wouldn't necessarily want to say no. But then as it is so new, we're just going to have to see as it develops, because at the moment, the main mentoring is specifically for those who are going back into employment. But if there is a need for it to be with students, then we can absolutely look into that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Safia, do you have a question?
Yes, sure. So my question is related to mentoring. Mentoring shouldn't be just kind of one way. I wondered whether there's a possibility and scope for your participants for them to support and mentor others, so they have a lot of wealth of experience to offer, and perhaps they could become mentors to young refugees or to work with other people, because I'm sure they have things to offer. Is that something that you have considered?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely works both ways. We haven't started it with students. We have just been focusing on the people going into professional employment. But equally, I think there is something in that when it comes to employers as well. So for example, the professionals who are, UK-based professionals who have been here for however long and have worked here all their lives, those people are also kind of getting an introduction into the barriers that our clients are facing, how they can overcome, how as an organization and as an individual they can kind of adapt and support people. And I think that's really, really, really powerful.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Safia. If anyone does have any questions, please do pop your camera on to ask them, or pop them in the chat box. I have one for you, Kate, if that's okay. You mentioned when you arrived, there was no big NGO or UK presence.
Yeah.
That to me speaks volumes. What does that say about the UK in terms of our response to refugees? From your perspective, no need to put no need to say it from RefuAid.
Yeah.
From a personal perspective,
I think it does just sum it up very, very neatly. I think there was no UK presence, there was no large NGO presence, but what we were seeing was that there were hundreds of individuals and groups that had got together, and they were just doing it because they wanted to help desperately. So there were people there handing out SIM cards. There were people there who had set up a kind of area where they were filtering people based on, people would come up to them and say, I don't want to stay in Poland, I want to go to Spain, I want to go to the UK, I want to go to Canada, wherever it was. They'd make a record of their interest, and then they would process them based on that. And that was just kind of, a group of people getting together. And I think it shows the power of people. And I think the emergency response that we've seen from all the big organizations is phenomenal, and it has served a purpose. But the problem that we see is there is no long-term planning whatsoever. So the emergency response is great, but we need to see the long-term solutions. We need to see, people planning for resettlement, people planning for the employment, people planning for integration. We need to see, the long-term, because that's what people are looking for when they fled their countries. Obviously, they first get to their point of safety. That's great. That's where they need to be. But then they need to start thinking about where they go next. And without the big NGOs helping, I think people are at a bit of a loss.
Thank you. So what, at the risk of putting you on the spot, what would you say to those NGOs?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I would just personally, I would just say, just go there and see it and speak to people, because I think that's what big NGOs now lack, is that they've just got to the point where they are so large and they are so, so big and so vast. And I think that actually it almost takes away that human element. And I think if you just I went, because we went and we just, you know, sat there with people and we said, what do you need? What are you looking for? Because we don't know, we've not been in that situation. And those, like we were saying before, those people need to be leading those conversations, because it's their lives, it's their lives that need rebuilding, and we need to lead from them.
I think we see it a lot with organisations that start small and then turn into these massive machines. We see it with a lot of big charities here. They kind of lose sight of the grassroots purpose of what they were created for. Exactly.
And yeah, it's keeping that conversation going with the people that you're helping, because you can't help them unless you know exactly what they need.
Absolutely. Hale, hi Hale, says we offer ESOL courses at South Bank colleges, which come under the LSBU group. And at the moment, we're offering ESOL courses to Ukrainian refugees. I came across a small number of professionals who are already above the level of courses we offer. These people are actively looking for jobs and do not know where to start. Can we refer them to you?
Yes, absolutely. So for our language program, because of the ESOL provision that exists, we tend to suggest to people to go through the ESOL program to kind of get themselves just proficiency, sorry. And then, so we then tend to say people should be ESOL level 3 when they come to us, and then we can take them from ESOL level 3 to the level that they need to be for employment or education. So if you do have anyone at that stage, then yes, please feel free to refer them. I can send you the link to our application form. The application form on our website does say it's for language, but we do accept referrals via that form for all of our programs.
Fantastic. And I'll just pop in the website in the chat box just there. Hannah asks, how do those arriving in the UK find out about the services you offer? Is it mostly through word of mouth at the moment? As I imagine it can be difficult to spread the word about what you do and how to access your services.
Yes, so at the moment it is mostly just word of mouth, whether that is through clients that we already support or whether it is through the schools. We do have a lot of people who approach the schools directly, and then the schools will refer them back to us. We've not done any, kind of large scale advertising of our support, and that is simply because we do already have the waiting list that we have. If we were ever to be able to get through that, then obviously we could do publicity and we could advertise a bit more, but at the moment, because we do receive so many applications, we just haven't kind of got around to it. And we're still very much, I guess, on the topic of big NGOs compared to grassroots, is we are still very much at that stage where we are, we're a team of 16 now, we were a team of 11 at the beginning of the year, and we are very much at that stage where, because we are such a close-knit team and because we are a small team, we can provide really, really wraparound support and like holistic support to people. So everyone on all of our programs has a RefuAid caseworker, and that person will see them through, each step of the journey, will help them, will refer them to any other organizations if they need additional support that we don't necessarily provide. So that's kind of one of the benefits of the RefuAid programs, but it also means that we can't necessarily grow as fast as other organizations.
Is that part of the long-term strategy for RefuAid in terms of looking to the future?
Yeah, it is. We have just grown a little bit, and I think we're now at the point where we're going to try and steady the ship and just make sure that everything is working as it should, and just consolidate everything. And then in the future, if we do feel like we need to grow, then we will. But it's always that fine line, isn't it, between growing and making sure you maintain that really personable, individual nature that we have with our clients, and that's key. We'd rather take longer to support people and do it really thoroughly than to support, hundreds more people and not do it to the best of our ability.
Thank you. I think that brings us on quite nicely just to tie in the link between RefuAid and London South Bank University, if that's okay.
Yeah.
We invited RefuAid to speak last year on a panel discussion around kind of employability and opportunities for refugees, and RefuAid kindly took part in that panel discussion, and from that we have now launched a scholarship for some of your service users, which has been absolutely brilliant. So RefuAid service users can apply for a scholarship at London South Bank University, one of our seven schools, and I think we've got 5 applications so far out of the 5 schools. But that's kind of like a temporary, that's a one-off thing, and we're obviously looking forward to working with you more and developing that, but using this as a starting block and starting small to make sure we get it right. How important is it to make sure you get it right before you go too big?
It is it is probably the most important aspect of setting something like this up, because what we have seen previously is, and it's not necessarily a bad thing because it comes from a lot of goodwill, but there are a lot of universities who have said, okay, great, we're going to do scholarships. Here's scholarships, go. And whilst that is amazing, they obviously then don't necessarily have kind of the support that goes with that. So we tend to get quite a lot of very, very last minute referrals for our language program, because people have secured an offer and secured a scholarship from a university, but the university haven't kind of advised them on the process, and they didn't know that they needed to get the IELTS as part of that scholarship. So then we'll have to kind of get them through to get their IELTS, you know, in a very short amount of time, which is doable, but it obviously puts a lot of pressure on the student. So I think kind of understanding the entire process and working with an organization that kind of understands that and so can support and can advise is massively important, because although it's amazing to set stuff up, we need to do it in a well-informed way that is adaptable as well.
And sustainable as well, because actually if you just go all in and make all the promises,
yeah,
there's time, resource, capacity issues that can actually just lead it to a halt before it's even set off.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I know with us it's been kind of like, you know, it has been a slow process, and there are lots of things that we're both learning on as we go through it, but I know we're hoping that will lead on to more support, but we're just starting where we are. So in terms of other organizations that might be interested in either kind of like education or employment opportunities, what is the best way to reach out to you guys? Obviously kind of like there's the usual channels, but what would you encourage them to think about?
As individuals or as organizations?
As organizations. We'll move on to shortly.
So as organizations, I mean, specifically for universities, I'd always say the scholarships and like considering all of the elements of that, and becoming a university of sanctuary and encouraging student action for refugee groups, which I think you guys already do anyway. And then as a kind of wider organization, if you are employing, I think just be really reflective in your employment policies, make sure that they align with your actual procedures, because we see it quite a lot where people will say on their applications or their job adverts, we encourage people from diverse backgrounds to apply, which is great. But then you see on the job advert, you know, must have X amount of years experience in the UK, or must have, you know, done a UK degree. And it's like those two things don't align. So I think encouraging organizations to really reflect on that and to, you know, make sure that it all aligns and make sure that it all makes sense and make sure it is actually accessible, because it's fine to say it, but if you're not actually following through with, you know, opening it up and making it accessible, then it's not going to work.
Well, it's just empty. Unless you're going to do it properly, it's just empty words, isn't it? So
exactly.
Absolutely. Rula.
Thank you for allowing me to ask again. I know that you mentioned like about prioritizing asylum seekers or refugees who got a university offer. Is it only for university? And you mentioned like undergraduate offer. We have clients who are applying for colleges to become like professionals. Like one of them, she was applying to have like a dental nurse course. Some of them, they might want to become beauty professional. Or do you consider colleges as well as the same way that you do for universities offer?
Yeah, I think it would just again come down to case by case. I think if people can basically explain why they want to do it and where it's going to take them, then yes, absolutely, we would consider it. It just tends to be that university is the way that most of our clients favor. With colleges as well, the difficulty there is that for the language program, if they don't necessarily need the qualification such as IELTS, then they wouldn't necessarily be prioritized, because they could potentially go on to they could be on a volunteer tutor program, or they could do ESOL. So it's kind of if they need the IELTS that we would prioritize them, but basically.
Thanks, Rula.
Thank you so much.
If you have any questions at all, please do pop your cameras on to ask them, or you can pop it in the chat box. We've got some time for questions left. I'd like to focus. We'll go on to that individual question, because actually I think it's really important that when we finish, we leave people with their call to action and how they can support. But just one more question from me before we move on to that is the theme for Refugee Week 2022 is healing. What does healing mean to the work that RefuAid does?
I think the thing it always comes down to for us is people being able to live dignified lives. It's a word we use quite a lot because we don't think people should, you know, be reliant on organizations or reliant on other people. We know that through the conversations with all of our clients is that people want to live independently. They want to, you know, regain the aspects of their identity, because for so long, a lot of people, you know, get labeled as a refugee, they get labeled as an asylum seeker, and that becomes their identity, when actually, you know, they're a mother, they're a son, they're a lawyer, they're a beautician, whatever it is that is part of their identity. You know, regaining that back is so important, and definitely, I think, ultimately where healing comes from.
Absolutely, because there's, you know, not just dealing with potential trauma, fear, persecution, grief, loss, and displacement, you know, which are all enough to deal with, to then be stripped of your identity and to just be narrowed down to one solo element of who you are. That takes that's a lot, and on top of that, particularly we see in the UK, there's anti-refugee sentiment and constant barriers.
Yeah, and what we find a lot as well is that people assume that the word refugee is you know, a part of someone's identity, but actually it's a circumstance. It's something that's happened to someone. And whilst yes, those experiences do of course influence how people, you know, respond to things and what their identity is, but it is not who they are. It is just what has happened to them. And I think remembering that and understanding that is so important to supporting people towards healing.
Thank you for that. So just a final question. If you do have any final ones, please do pop them in the chat box, just for me. And Alice popped this in the chat box earlier. Background in sociology, always looking for ways to educate myself on how I can support refugees. How can people educate themselves, and what can individuals do on a practical level to support refugees?
I think one of the big things is challenging the rhetoric. So you just touched on it now. There's obviously a lot of anti-refugee sentiment in our politics, in our media, and I think questioning that, challenging it. If people come out with things that you don't think are necessarily correct, or you know, they're slightly misguided in their interpretation of who a refugee is, then challenge it. Don't just accept it as the norm. There's so much that needs to be done to override this rhetoric in the media and in politics. That's a huge one.
Well, it's just this constant need to see refugees as an issue or a problem, and it just removes any humanity and joy from refugee lives.
Exactly, and it is constant, and I don't unfortunately see it going away anytime soon, and that's why I think we all have that personal responsibility to do that, because it's very, very easy in this day and age to just, you know, rely on the news, on the media for all of the information coming through. And having seen the media representations of refugees and people who are arriving on small boats, it's just so different to the reality that I know, having spoken to so many of our clients. So I think also, you know, getting involved in community groups, whether it's in your local community, whether it's at LSBU, in any way, shape or form, just trying to understand a little bit more will go such a long way. I also think supporting, so identifying your individual skills or experiences that might be beneficial to people. So whether it is, you know, if you've ever taught English, you can tutor. If you have ever done a mental health first aider course, you can volunteer as a mental health first aider for refugees and asylum seekers. You can mentor. You can identifying your own personal strengths and seeing how you can help people who are in need is really valuable as well.
I mean, yeah, and volunteering days are a great example. Is that at LSBU we have free volunteering days, and you know, using those
exactly
to do something. Yeah. Love that message about playing into your skills as well. I think that's all. We've got nothing left in the chat box, so I think that brings us to a close. What would your parting words be for people today? Either advice or words of inspiration, or just leaving us with some joy.
Generally speaking, I would just say that I think you're all here because there is the goodwill and there is the wanting to understand more, and I think there's something that we can all do, even if it is small, even if you spend an hour with someone helping with CV writing or tutoring, or even just having a conversation with someone can be life-changing. And I think what we always try to do as well at RefuAid is to bring it down to those very, very small things, because those small things are so big in reality. So they might feel small to you, but they're so much bigger to other people. And I think always value that, and always value the fact that you can make a difference even on a small scale.
That is an amazing words to leave us with. Kate, thank you so much for making time today. We really appreciate it on behalf of myself, LSBU, and our audience. And it's an absolute pleasure to work with you and the team. You are amazing people doing amazing work, and I'm really grateful for your time. So thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you all. Thank you. We'll stop recording there.